beautiful music in the world.
It's an oasis.
An education in itself, listening to it.
I always feel that I'm learning something new.
Magnificent.
It's the best classical music station in the country.
The Illinois Secretary of State's office now requires appointments at select driver services facilities. To schedule an appointment for driver's licenses or ID cards, visit cyberdriveillinois.com. Check the website as the list of facilities statewide will continue to expand. Also, people can call the reservation helpline at 844-817-4649 for help in scheduling an appointment. Save time by scheduling your appointment today.
The Patrick and Shirley Ryan Grant for Creativity, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship makes possible stories that enrich lives and inspire our communities.
Before they were born, they lost their fathers in the tragedy of 9/11.
Why did he have to go to work that specific day?
They came of age in a time of social unrest.
It definitely took a toll.
Forged by loss and resilience, PBS traces 7 young lives as they carve their own paths in an ever-changing America.
I feel motivated to make a difference.
Generation 9/11.
Tonight at 8 on WTTW.
Hi, I'm Jess. You're watching WTTW in Chicago, the greatest city in the world.
Good evening, welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
I made the decision to end this war.
Reaction to the removal of U.S. troops and the end of the war in Afghanistan from Congress and from a former U.S. ambassador to NATO.
We can't accommodate everything. We did what we could.
State legislators are redoing a major law they just passed this spring. We'll tell you why.
COVID-19 cases among children are on the rise. Could the return of in-person schooling trigger even more cases?
Everything we do is about reclaiming.
Becoming Oral Historians, a new Gage Park program, is teaching young people how to document the stories of their own communities.
You're looking for Candyman.
Gentrification, horror, and art in the new Candyman movie.
The first business to open under a new pilot program for eateries is here. We've got the scoop.
And Stitches in Time, an exhibition blends music, history, and fabulous fabrics at the Art Institute. But first, some of today's top stories. Chicago has updated its travel advisory with new guidance for unvaccinated travelers, and now every state in the country falls under the advisory except one, Vermont. The advisory means unvaccinated travelers from those areas should be tested before departure and after arrival, as well as quarantine for a full 7 days, even if you've tested negative. The Chicago Department of Public Health says if travelers do not get tested, they should quarantine for 10 days. And more than 20 businesses received citations for failing to enforce the city's reimposed mask mandate this month. The Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection says it's issued 16 notices and 22 citations from August 20th, when the mandate went into effect, through August 29th. Some of the establishments shown here were given a notice to correct, meaning the businesses may have failed to post mask mandate signage or other fixes. BACP says it's putting all businesses on high alert that it'll be strictly enforcing the mandate. The mother of fallen Chicago police officer Ella French is extending her thanks to the people of Chicago and surrounding communities today on what would have been French's 30th birthday. In a letter shared today through the police department, Elizabeth French said, quote, "Your beautiful and heartfelt words of comfort, prayers, and donations will be remembered forever. More importantly, your love and support during this difficult time will be a treasure I carry with me for the rest of my life. She signed the letter, P.S. Happy birthday, Ella Grace. French was shot and killed earlier this month during a traffic stop in the West Englewood neighborhood. Up next, a remap redo with state lawmakers. We'll explain right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Lines of political power are being drawn in Springfield, or to be more precise, redrawn. Amanda Vinicky joins us now to explain. Amanda, what's going on as legislators are back in Springfield for a special session?
Brandis, their main goal is redoing a law that just passed in June. That law put in place boundaries for Illinois House and Senate districts. And these lines really are the keys to political power because the voters who are included or excluded from a district really make a huge difference in whether a candidate has any chance even of getting to Springfield to be a member of the General Assembly. And by its very nature, this once in a decade redistricting process is therefore a bruising and partisan one. But what is different this time around about that battle, Democrats who control the legislature and governor's mansion drew the maps without census data because the census data, due in part to the pandemic, hadn't arrived come spring. And if they had waited until that census information did arrive at states until earlier this month, Democrats would have had to work with Republicans to draw those maps. At a hearing in Springfield this morning, sponsor State Representative Lisa Hernandez promoted this latest version as improved.
The adjusted map before you today is one you can be proud to support. Each of the districts in the adjusted map before you was drawn to incorporate the 2020 census data and be substantially equal in population.
Now, that is important, says Frank CALABRESE. He's a consultant that works with politicians sometimes to help to figure out the district boundaries. So he's got kind of a more fun title, Map Maker. And CALABRESE did an analysis with the political blog Capital Facts and says that the original version, the one that became law, had a deviation of 30%, as in population shifts that were shown in that census data showed that districts had wildly uneven numbers of residents.
The reason why they're back in Springfield is because you cannot have one district that's much larger or smaller than another district. The map that was passed out of committee today, all the districts are basically the same at 108,000 and change.
CALABRESE says that another major concern map makers have to take into consideration is making sure that they're in compliance with state and federal voting rights laws that ensure that minority populations have representation. He says this map does a good job of that, especially when it comes to districts with a majority of Black residents. Not quite as much that case for districts with a majority of Latinos, and at least that is the contention of a lawsuit that has been brought by the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund. Now, asked repeatedly what changed between the first version of the maps and the one that's up for debate now, Hernandez struggled to give a definitive answer.
What I can tell you is that that feedback, I mean, there was some adjustments made. It might not be what everything that they would want, but definitely there was some consideration and some adjustment that took place.
Even as she's saying that adjustments were made in light of consideration of feedback from community groups, they say they didn't have chance to weigh in. This latest version wasn't introduced until mid-morning. At a hearing just after the proposal's release, community activist Reverend Robin Hood pleaded with legislators to make the proposed map available to the public for review at least 30 days before voting on it.
We asking the General Assembly to slow this process down so that the community can accurately engage in what's best for the district, because some of these districts are going to see painful resources just leave their districts.
Instead of 30 days, he got 20 minutes to review it, leading Republicans to continue their assertions that the whole process is a sham.
It just continues the farce that has been this entire process through redistricting. So we just continue the charade that we've seen all year long.
Now, not just Republicans there, the group Common Cause boycotted participating in a redistricting hearing, calling the process mishandled and created to ensure as little public as possible with the veneer of public access with a series of hearings. It's shameful, and our organization refuses to add any legitimacy to such an undemocratic process, Common Cause leader Jay Young said in a statement. Now, likewise, leaders of the Muslim and Middle Eastern community are sure to be disappointed after an active effort to be drawn into districts where their community could have power as a voting bloc.
They showed up at every redistricting hearing, and they apparently were really left out of this map. The southwest suburbs has a very large Palestinian and Arab community, and their district was divided into 4 separate state house districts. And there's really no cohesion to the districts for that community.
Now, the legislature is still at it tonight. And by the way, that latest version of the map that was made public this morning, not even the final one, another version came out this evening. I will, however, spare you the suspense of how this is going to end. You are going to have Democrats in the General Assembly pass it, and then Governor Pritzker sure to sign it, even though that means he will once again be breaking a campaign promise to veto any partisan drawn map. But really, then, this is going to be a matter that is tossed to the courts. Brenda, back to you.
Okay, Amanda, thank you. And now to Paris and congressional reaction to the end of the war in Afghanistan. Paris.
Brandis, President Joe Biden spoke earlier today about the official end of the 20-year war in Afghanistan. Here is some of what he said.
I was not going to extend this forever war, and I was not extending a forever exit. The decision to end the military airlift operations at Kabul airport was based on the unanimous recommendation of my civilian and military advisors.
And joining us to talk about the military's pullout from Afghanistan and more is Congressman Rodney Davis, a Republican from Taylorville who is the ranking Republican on the Committee on House Administration. We invited a number of Democrats from the Illinois delegation to join us, but they declined our invitation. Congressman Davis, thank you for being with us. You heard the president there. He has defended ending this war after 20 years, and he has defended the execution of the withdrawal. Do you agree with his assessment?
Absolutely not. I think President Biden and his administration completely own the botched execution of this plan. It was a plan that we have seen has had deadly consequences for our brave men and women in the U.S. military. And this will go down as one of the worst decisions made by any president in American history.
Which decision? The decision to end the war or how it was done?
The execution of this plan was abysmal. We have billions of dollars in military equipment in the hands of the Taliban. His own military leaders have questioned that vote of unanimity, but he is the commander-in-chief. He owns this. And frankly, when you look at what's happened in Afghanistan, we as leaders have to educate the American people as to what is the best plan of action in anything we do. And I think it would have been easy for him and his administration to talk about having a force of 2,500 rotating American military personnel in Afghanistan to keep the embassy open, to keep Bagram Air Base, and to be that force maximizer to the Afghan military and the Afghan government. Instead, he pulled out. Their entire administration miscalculated. And Afghanistan is now under the control of the Taliban, and they have more provinces today than they did on September 10th of 2001.
Now, the president says that there was unanimous consent that the Afghan security forces would be able to hold longer than they did. Were there any credible voices saying the opposite, planning for a worst-case scenario that occurred?
Well, let me just say, I've been in top top security briefings, top level that I can't talk about here. And I will tell you, I didn't get the indication that there was unanimity that there wasn't going to be disastrous consequences. However, I can't speak about the details, but in the end, he's the commander in chief. He makes the final decisions with military leaders, and their job is to go execute those orders. They executed those orders. And frankly, now Congress, in a bipartisan way, needs to do its job, and we need to conduct oversight. We need to bring these military leaders in front of congressional panels, have Republicans and Democrats ask these questions. The American people deserve to know the answers.
So you're calling for congressional inquiries into how this drawdown was handled?
Yeah, there's absolutely no reason that Chairman Smith of the Armed Services Committee and also other committees of jurisdiction, there's no reason they shouldn't bring in military leaders and ask them why this decision was made and ask them why their planners were so wrong into thinking that the Afghan government would be able to sustain itself when their entire security apparatus was built upon our forces and our air power being force maximizers.
There are still reports that there are between 100 and 200 Americans left in Afghanistan. The Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, said there will be diplomatic channels to help get some of these folks out that want to come out. What is the diplomatic leverage here the U.S. has?
Zero, because the Biden administration has botched this so badly, we have no leverage over the Taliban. And I cannot believe that the Biden administration staged a photo op acting like the last American out was the general in charge when we have hundreds of Americans still there. This, again, because of issues like this, will go down in American history as one of the worst decisions a president has ever made.
Congressman, we've spoken with a lot of refugee and immigrant groups here that are worried about the Afghans that remain there, those that assisted the United States. Not only them, but their families. They say that all of them are in danger of being killed by the Taliban. What can you do, what can Congress do to assist in their evacuation and resettlement potentially here in the United States?
Well, my office has dealt with some of the special immigrant visa requests. My office has been engaged in making sure that families of Americans and those who supported our American efforts were able to get out. But the bottom line is there are no Americans that are there to safely evacuate any of these Americans or any of the Afghan interpreters who have risked their lives in helping our military. It's a shame. It didn't have to be this way. But President Biden and his administration made sure that their lives and their ability to get here safely and work through diplomatic channels are severely challenged right now.
But the fact that there are still so many Afghans and several dozen Americans, does it mean that there has to be some kind of diplomatic channel with the Taliban to ensure their safety?
Several dozen. There are hundreds of American citizens still stuck, and that's just the number that's reported. Let's not downgrade that it's dozens, because one is too many, Paris. But when you look at the Taliban, the Biden administration has already decided to provide diplomatic efforts with the Taliban when they allowed the Taliban to provide security in Kabul. They gave up Kabul to the Taliban, and they've already created an opportunity for the Taliban to view themselves as a legitimate part of the global society. And that is just amazing to me that the president still does not take any blame for how badly this entire situation was botched that led to the deaths of 13 brave Americans.
And to be fair, Congressman, I should mention the former presidential administration did negotiate with the Taliban, did negotiate an initial withdrawal deal and an initial timeline. I want to move to domestic politics because before this transpired, there was an infrastructure bill that you were helping negotiate. It passed the Senate. What's the status of that in the House right now?
Well, there really is no status. The Speaker has decided to call for a vote sometime at the end of September. My colleagues, who many of them are my friends on the moderate side of the Democratic Party, they caved. They decided to vote for the rule to allow the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package that will bankrupt our family farms from being transferred to the next generation by the heinous tax changes that are being proposed. And really, what it's done is allowed the progressives to really have the leverage. And they have now said that they will not vote on any infrastructure bill unless it's closely attached to the $3.5 trillion reconciliation that includes their liberal wish list.
So does that imperil the chances in the House? I mean, is it any consensus on a roll call at this point for that bill, for the $1 trillion infrastructure bill?
No, there's zero consensus, or they would have had it. As a matter of fact, the Speaker could call that piece of legislation up any day, any day she wants. We were in D.C. She could have put it on the floor. She chose not to, which tells me that she's doing everything that the far left progressives in that wing of the Democratic Party want. And they're trying to leverage a very popular title of infrastructure to pass a $3.5 trillion wish list that they've now self-titled human infrastructure. If you were a taxpayer in the state of Illinois, be very concerned when my Democratic colleagues in Washington begin to rationalize what is infrastructure and what is not. We know what it is. And Democrats are trying to make sure that they try to fool you into spending trillions more.
All right, Congressman Rodney Davis, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Paris. Take care.
You as well. And later in the program, we'll have more on the withdrawal from Afghanistan with a former U.S. ambassador to NATO. But first, to Brandis and a look at the rising number of COVID cases among kids. Brandis.
In Paris, the highly infectious Delta variant has led to an increase in children testing positive for COVID. Of particular concern is the rise in children aged 5 to 11 testing positive, since that group is still too young to be vaccinated. The Illinois Department of Public Health's most recent figures show some 660 children in Cook County, ages 5 to 11, have tested positive for the week ending August 21st. The numbers have been steadily rising since the end of June, when just 29 children in that age group were diagnosed. Joining us now to share their insights on the impact of the virus on children is Dr. Tina Tan, professor of pediatrics and infectious diseases at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. Dr. Tan is also affiliated with Lurie Children's Hospital. And Dr. Taylor HEALD-SARGENT, a pediatrician and infectious disease specialist at Lurie Children's Hospital. Doctors, thanks you both for joining us. Dr. HEALD-SARGENT, let's start with you, please. I understand that Lurie is seeing a rise in children with COVID. How much of an increase would you say you've been seeing?
So, as it's been through most of the pandemic, we've seen the rates mimic what's going on with adults. So as the number of positive adults has increased, so has the number of positive children. And in the adult population, a lot of them can be vaccinated, but in the children they can't, so the rates are continuing to rise.
And Dr. Tan, would you say that, this increase is mostly because of the Delta variant?
Yes, we know now that the Delta variant accounts for over 93% of the amount of COVID that's being seen in the community. So the vast majority of the cases are going to be caused by the Delta variant in the children.
And is the Delta variant necessarily more dangerous for children, Dr. Tan?
Not necessarily more dangerous, but definitely more transmissible. We know that because of its high transmissibility, individuals that are susceptible to COVID because they cannot be vaccinated are going to be more likely to get it.
Okay. Dr. HEALD-SARGENT, how severe are the symptoms for children who are being hospitalized?
So just to keep in mind, overall, children don't get as severe of symptoms as adults, but we are seeing an increase in symptoms in general with the Delta variant. Most of these are more like your common cold, what we call our upper respiratory symptoms, cough, congestion. It might seem like they have their allergies. When they start to have issues with keeping fluids down or with their breathing, that's when they have to be hospitalized. And we've seen this all throughout the pandemic, that a certain proportion, thankfully a small amount of children compared to the amount that are testing positive, have to be hospitalized with these more severe symptoms. But as numbers overall start to rise, the numbers of children hospitalized are also rising.
Now, here in Chicago, we know that kids headed back into the classroom just yesterday. Here's Dr. Anthony Fauci and what he told CNN this weekend with Jake Tapper discussing vaccine mandates for children.
I believe that mandating vaccines for children to appear in school is a good idea. And remember, Jake, this is not something new. We have mandates in many places in schools, particularly public schools, that if in fact you want a child to come in, we've done this for decades and decades.
I should correct myself. That was on Sunday, not yesterday. But children under 12 not yet cleared for the vaccine. And here in Chicago, as I mentioned, students are back in the classroom. Dr. Tan, are you concerned that we could see a jump in cases because students are back in classrooms?
Yeah, we could see a jump in cases, but I think that if mask mandates are in place and other tiered mitigation protective protocols are in place, this is going to decrease the amount of disease that potentially could happen in the classroom setting, especially if all individuals that are eligible for vaccination are vaccinated.
We just heard Dr. FAUCI talk about vaccine mandates in school. Dr. HEALD-SARGENT, is this something that that you think we should be seeing in the coming months when that is available next year?
I think it would make sense. We need to use every tool available to us to end this pandemic and to drive these rates down. Vaccines are our most effective preventative tool. Right now we're using masks because they're the most effective thing we have. Paired with vaccines, that's when we're really going to start to see things improve.
Dr. Tan, children under the age of 12, parents, you know, the world over probably want to know, many do anyway, when their children in that age group will be able to receive the vaccine. What do we know about how soon that could happen?
So currently the trials are ongoing, testing this vaccine in individuals under 12 years of age. It's expected that data from those trials should be available by the middle of fall. And if everything goes well, an EUA for the use of the vaccine in these children should be available by the end of the year.
And some parents might also be wondering, you know, if we saw vaccines for adults roll out so quickly, why are children taking a little bit longer? What is the FDA? What are the experts? What are they looking for? What do they need to know?
So the FDA actually in July put out a request to both Moderna and Pfizer asking for additional safety information on the use of the vaccine in these children. And they also asked both of these companies to double the number of kids that they were enrolling in the 5 to 11-year-old age group. So because of this request and the request for additional safety information, this has pushed back the availability of the vaccine for a month or two.
Dr. HEALD-SARGENT, any reason to believe that there may be additional health risks for children with regards to receiving the vaccine? And would we expect that children might receive, of that age group in particular, that they might receive a smaller dose than adults?
So we know that children, in particular in this age group, do respond very well to vaccines. And so it would not be surprising, and what I've heard is it's kind of expected that they'll probably end up having a lower dose approved. And that should help with some of those side effects that are more inflammatory, such as your sore arm or the red arm. The rare side effects, the ones that are very concerning, we don't expect to be seen, just like we didn't see them very much with the adult population. And the guidance out of the advisory committees just yesterday reaffirmed that the heart risk and other risks are very rare and less than the risk of the disease themselves.
And Dr. HEALD-SARGENT, before I let you go, what would your advice be to parents regarding getting their children vaccinated when that becomes possible?
Just do it. Please go out, get your children vaccinated. I know all vaccines are not to be taken lightly, but that's why we have invested so much time and energy as a medical community testing these. We have not skipped any steps. We are making sure they're safe as possible, and I can't wait to be able to have my children vaccinated.
Super simple advice, borrowing from the famous Nike slogan, just do it. My thanks to Dr. Taylor HEALD-SARGENT and Dr. Tina Tan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, how the Gage Park Latinx Council is teaching youth to be oral historians. Stay with us. Is there anything that these police departments can do to earn trust from the community at this point? What inspired you to propose this bill?
Need some legislation. We've got to turn the page on this history.
What are the ways in which we can hold institutions accountable while also providing an opportunity for community to show up and not only just demand, but ask that we build these bridges together, because I think that that's the only way that we're truly going to get free.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including more on the withdrawal from Afghanistan with a former U.S. ambassador to NATO. But first, a new outdoor exhibition in Gage Park tells the neighborhood's history from the perspective of residents who live there. It's part of a new program started by the Gage Park Latinx Council, inviting the area's youth to reclaim the community's narrative. Marcos Hernandez grew up in the Gage Park area on Chicago's southwest side. Hernandez says the media often focus on violence in the community without contextualizing neighborhood challenges like disinvestment.
The only narrative that is told about our neighborhood focuses on that trauma, that decontextualized trauma. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to reclaim our narrative. We wanted the people from this neighborhood to tell their stories on their own terms.
Hernandez is one of 10 Gage Park youth working to change this narrative. They're part of a new program called Documentografia, run by the Gage Park Latinx Council and in collaboration with the Chicago History Museum. It's a paid internship program that teaches young people how to be oral historians of their community.
A lot of our histories as Latinx folks are oral, and if they are not documented, they are lost when we lose generations of folks. And so we want to commit to curating and protecting those histories.
The participants spent the first part of the program learning from museum curators, and the second portion collecting stories from the community's residents. They captured it through photography and oral histories. Hernandez says more authentic stories are told when residents document their own community's history.
We get stories about joy, community, coming together to overcome obstacles. We get stories that inspire people towards action, but we also get stories that are not necessarily related to like mobilizing for action. We get just stories of people living their lives, their everyday lives.
The program really allowed us to learn about stuff that we probably wouldn't learn about in school, and we definitely wouldn't see in media.
The participants finished the program by creating an outdoor exhibition of their work in a garden that's also run by the council. Before installing the exhibit, they made a prototype of the area to plan its layout.
We also learned about how to curate an exhibition to be accessible to the people of the community and not just rich people who can afford to go to museums. And some people work at night, some people work very early in the morning. So the exhibition is open at all times and it's in the community. It's in a garden space, so it's not locked up or anything.
The exhibition connects Gage Park's history with its present through issues like gentrification and displacement.
Connecting that issue to like displacement that might have happened in the past, whether it was this community or maybe some surrounding communities.
The exhibit also covers entrepreneurship, white flight, and the civil rights movement. Director of the council, Antonio Santos, says the vision is to continue the program and to make the cultural center a hub for Gage Park's histories.
So that histories can live in our own communities, and we're not depending on museums and institutions to do the work to show our stories some dignity.
The exhibition is located in the garden at the intersection of South Homan Avenue and West 53rd Place in Gage Park. Now, Paris, back to you.
Thank you very much, Brandis. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, Chicago now has a pilot program for new eateries opening amid the pandemic. We share the story of the first business to make use of the sweet deal. A former ambassador to NATO shares his thoughts on the end of the war in Afghanistan and the chaotic withdrawal from the country. Gentrification, horror, and art in the new Candyman movie. We talk with a local critic to hear her thoughts on the film.
The mirror invites you
And Stitches in Time, an exhibition at the Art Institute, blends music, history, and fabulous fabrics. But first, some more of today's top stories. More states added to Chicago's COVID-19 travel list today, leaving one state that is not on it. That's Vermont. City officials added Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Hampshire, Washington, D.C., and Guam to the travel advisory. Now, unvaccinated visitors to Chicago from those states are urged to quarantine for 10 days or record a negative test for the coronavirus within 72 hours of their arrival, according to Chicago officials. A suburban man pleads guilty to charges related to his involvement in the January 6 riots on Capitol Hill. Inverness resident Bradley Ruxtales struck the plea agreement and will submit to a law enforcement interview regarding his actions surrounding that event. Hairstyles was fired from his job as CEO of Schaumburg-based tech company Cogencia after the charges became public. He has called the event the, quote, single worst personal decision of his life. As we talked about earlier in the program, the United States has ended its 20-year war in Afghanistan. President Biden claims success with the mission of airlifting more than 100,000 people out of the country, even as it cost the lives of 13 U.S. service members and hundreds of civilians in recent days. The president again acknowledged the White House was caught off guard by the swift surrender of Afghan forces to the Taliban.
That assumption that the Afghan government would be able to hold on for a period of time beyond military drawdown turned out not to be accurate.
And joining us now is Ivo Daalder, president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and former U.S. ambassador to NATO from 2009 to 2013. Ivo Daalder, thank you for coming back here on Chicago Tonight. Good to see you.
My pleasure. Good to be back.
So, in the diplomatic community, is this withdrawal and the ending of this war and the execution of it seen as a success, as the president sees it?
Well, I think you have to make a distinction between the different levels. First of all, on the decision on whether or not to withdraw. I think largely people around the world are seeing that decision as the right decision, a decision that was in fact long in coming and probably should have been taken a lot earlier. It is probably a decision that would have benefited from more consultation with our allies at NATO, who, by the way, have been with us in this mission from day one until the very last day. But overall, the idea that the United States and its allies should end this mission is something that finds widespread support among allies and indeed among the American public. Then the question on execution. And here one hears grumbling from particular allies, particularly in Europe, that there was not enough consultation, not enough information being shared about how the withdrawal was going to happen. I think looking back at some of the decisions that were made, one can say there is a reason to be critical, and one could have done perhaps a better job. But overall, I think we also have to remember that any evacuation, particularly when it takes place in a hostile environment, is going to be extraordinarily difficult and extraordinarily complex as an operation. And within that background, no one has ever taken 122,000 people out of a country in which it no longer controls the ground, or much else.
Certainly that happened in a swift amount of time, but the president keeps saying that consensus was Afghan security forces would hold longer. Were there any voices, either in the United States or among U.S. allies, that said the opposite, that said that the U.S. should prepare for a scenario where the Taliban takes over in the blink of an eye?
I mean, there were no doubt some voices here and there. There's been internal reviews
the color textiles.
They may look like paintings or photographs, but they are quilts inspired by documentary photos from the Library of Congress and family snapshots. We spoke with the artist from her home studio in New Jersey.
It's like walking through a family photo album that was life-size. I like the idea that we're seeing them and they're also seeing us. And we're looking at them from whatever time they came from. Some of my photos could have been taken from the 1850s or the 1940s. And they're looking back at us in our time.
Bisa Butler and her husband, a longtime DJ, curated a Spotify playlist of songs to complement each artwork. And she adds notes of visual elegance to her subjects.
I'm looking at people during World War II, a lot of the photos that are in the exhibit. And Black people in the South and in the Midwest were struggling. And so sometimes their clothing is worn and frayed, or sometimes they don't have on shoes, or the hat could be torn. And because I'm sewing in my nature, I feel compelled that I have to fix those things. My mom and my grandmother taught me to sew. My mother was a French teacher and my grandmother was a homemaker, but they were always trying to make replica Christian Dior gowns or replica Halston. I think about myself being like one in the succession of this long line of quilters. And that's one thing that I really love about quilting, that it grounds you in this history of women creating.
Now, Butler's modern works are installed in galleries usually reserved for centuries-old European painting and sculpture.
It's mind-blowing having my installation above that grand staircase. It's been trippy and wonderful.
We asked an Art Institute textile curator for her take on the artwork.
There really is a very sculptural quality, and even in many of them, a sense of motion. You can notice it particularly in the faces and in the hands, and you'll see really, too, an evolution of her practice in the works in the exhibition, where you can see how she's adding additional layers and stitching more to really create these sculptural effects.
Bisa Butler also pays tribute to Afra Cobra, the influential Chicago art collective that emerged in the 1960s.
I went to Howard University, and our professors in the painting faculty mostly came from the Afra Cobra group. And they basically represented, I would say, one of the visual artistic arms of the Black Power movement. The philosophies that they had was that artists' work should reflect the community. You know, I hope that my work can inform and educate people, and also speak to people's sensibility of looking into each person as they pass as a real human being who deserves respect and recognition, just the same way you would look at a piece of artwork.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
Bisa Butler's show is on view at the Art Institute of Chicago a little bit longer, through September 6th. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. A new effort hopes to get high-speed rail running across Illinois. We share the details.
Plus, a new exhibit featuring works from one of the world's most infamous street artists. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.